Hi, thanks a lot for coming. My name is Jeremy Kirk. I'm a technology journalist with IDG, which publishes titles like Computer World and PC World and Mac World, and I cover computer security, privacy, and startups. This is Jonathan Englert. He's the founder of Andiron Group, which is a consultancy for startups. He's also been a journalist and author of several fiction and nonfiction books. And we're here to talk about today No Dead Monkeys, which we think is the first sort of guide to communications for startups. And a lot of people have kind of commented about the monkey and the title, so I think a good place to start would be to tell you the story behind it. And it involves a world-famous zoo that we cannot name and a software company that participated in a very large project with the zoo. The zoo was looking to try to automate a lot of the things that they were doing manually and make things more efficient. And among the tasks that this very large and expensive software system was supposed to do was supposed to feed the animals. And after they completed the project, there was a terrible failure, and sadly, a lot of monkeys died. And so we thought this anecdote, while tragic, also sort of exemplified some of the issues that we've seen in startups and kind of motivated us to write this guide to communications.
Yeah, exactly. When Jeremy and I got together, it was really clear he's on the journalism side. I'm an ex-journalist working on the communication strategy side. It was very clear that we were seeing the same kind of issues and mistakes and pitfalls in the startups that we were both working with and covering. And to both of us, it was communications. So oftentimes a startup they'll be focused on a lot of different elements, but they won't be thinking about their story or where they're going to be going as a company, what their fundamentals are from a story perspective, and they won't be communicating that with themselves, and they won't be communicating that with the media. And that was really our starting point. So No Dead Monkeys essentially is both a guide and also a sort of philosophy to going through this early process of communications. And I'm going to take you through some points, and Jeremy, you're going to be telling some anecdotes from what he's seen on the other side of the table as a journalist. I've got to find it in my own book. So we've seen startups waste all kinds of energy on things that seem practical at the time, but really don't matter nearly as much as getting their story straight. There are 3 points that I want to raise now that are quite important for the startup. The first is you want to find your visionary. So a lot of people talk about vision. You know, companies have to have a vision. And presumably we have a visionary. You want to find someone in your startup that embodies what you actually do, why you're doing it. And you want that person to be someone who can speak to the wider world about that and also inform your own company about it. Now, the trick here is that frequently the type of people who form startups have a lot of ideas, and they're drawn oftentimes in a lot of different directions. So what you need to do with your visionary is make sure that they're disciplined, because it's not going to help you if your visionary goes in front of the media one day saying one thing and then the next day saying something else, because it happens to interest them. So one key element is becoming a professional as a visionary. So just imagine Mick Jagger, right? You know, he's been singing Brown Sugar for 4 decades. But each time he gets on stage, his fans are expecting that, right? He might want to sing the latest thing that he's done, but he still needs to sing Brown Sugar like it's the first time. And with startups, this is especially important because you want to be able to, you're going to have a core message, say you're a problem that you're going to solve, right? Until the whole market, until the whole world really knows that, you have to keep repeating that same story. So you have to have that discipline. So your visionary really needs to be disciplined and staying on point again and again. The second point is you want your dysfunction to be your difference. Now, a lot of times, you hear startups who want to act like they're bigger than they are, and that's true, you do. but you also want to know that your strangeness, like your weirdness, is an okay thing, right? From a journalistic point of view, it's actually really important. So, for example, say your startup is in your mom's living room and she makes great grilled cheese sandwiches, okay? Well, if you have a journalist coming over to see your operation, there's nothing wrong at times with sort of having them see you actually in the reality that you inhabit, right? Sample those grilled cheese sandwiches, that's okay. That's a dysfunction, maybe, but it's going to be color for the journalist. It's going to be part of that story. So don't be ashamed of that. Don't be afraid of that, of your origin or where you're coming from. The third thing is probably the most important for startups in terms of news value. Because it's one thing when you go to the media with your initial story. You know, maybe you'll get one story out of that. But as you go down the path, you're going to have to come up with other bits and pieces of news, right? Other things that are of value. And what you need to do is really know your treasure. So what I mean by that is, say, for example, you have a partnership that you've just, landed. Or you have a patent that you have just, gotten. Just because you've gotten it just today doesn't mean you need to announce it today, right? You actually have control over your news value. You can decide when to deploy it and how to deploy it. So this is a frequently seen thing with startups. I've seen this many times, where someone, say the founder, will be in an interview with a journalist, and they would have just gotten a great piece of news, big news for their business, right? And they suddenly go, oh, well, I've got to share that too. Well, you don't have to share that too. And maybe you probably shouldn't. You should hold on to that, put it away, and deploy that later, right? So just do a regular, your regular media interview, and then deploy your special pieces of treasure later at when you need to. Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a startup that I covered 4 years ago that was kind of given a golden goose and did a lot of things wrong. It was called Mt. Gox. Some of you might be familiar with this. This was the prominent Bitcoin exchange around 2012. And when it was, its founders didn't really know what they had been given. And as Bitcoin became increasingly popular in 2012, there were only a handful of trading platforms with which to trade it, and Mt. Gox was one of them. And so at one time they had about a sort of an 80% market share, and then everything went horribly wrong. That year and the later year, their exchange became attacked by cyber criminals who were trying to manipulate the price of Bitcoin. And the company wasn't really prepared for this. And sometimes they would put press releases on their website. Sometimes they would just respond on their Facebook page and not vice versa. And customers had put a lot of money into the company, and they wanted to know exactly what was happening. And often when you went there for an answer, there was no answer to be had at all. Another thing that became evident later is that the founder had sort of surrounded himself with his friends. Now, there's nothing wrong with running a business with your friends, but they may not be the right people that you need in key positions. Mt. Gox was facing a really new market. Bitcoin was entirely new. The regulators didn't understand it. People often didn't understand it. So there was a very clear need for them to have a clear story. Also, they just kind of forgot about their customers. The money had started rolling in. They were making tens of thousands of dollars a month. And when their customers started to get angry, they didn't address that. It became evident later that the CEO was spending much of his time planning out for a Bitcoin cafe rather than focusing on his customers, which he should have been doing. So one lesson from that is, like, if you're a founder, recognize when you're in over your head. It's not a sign of weakness. It's in fact a sign of strength. And you want to be sure that the people that are surrounding you do have the skills to do what you need to do. You have to keep focused on your customers and your core business, even if the money is rolling in. It's easy to be lulled into a sense of complacency when things are going really well, but things can change overnight. And if you are lucky enough to be given a golden goose, you want to make sure that you don't lose it, and that requires a real laser focus on your, core task, which with Gox it was trading Bitcoins.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting about that story, Jeremy, and we talked about this a few times, is that here he has a market-leading position in creating a market for Bitcoin, and he decides to focus on sort of in the end user side, which is this cafe, instead of creating a great deep market where these cafes will just spring up by themselves and then he'll serve them. And so I think that is an excellent example of where the visionary sort of could use quite a bit of discipline just to stay on point. But the second point is about crisis in general. And part of what we talk about in the book is crisis communications, because invariably every startup will have some kind of crisis, right? And in fact, it's not a bad thing, because it means that people are taking notice of you. You know, you actually want, crisis isn't bad. I mean, it means you're relevant. Now, there are a few points that I want to cover about that. I'm taking 3 from the book that I think are especially important. The first is you always want to take things offline. So you hear a lot about people saying, well, we have to engage on social media with our customers or our users or whatever. And that's true. But when a customer complaint comes online or there's a serious issue, oftentimes you'll see, you know, someone will post on Facebook something that's central to your business that's just gone wrong, right? And you know it's a problem, and here they are making it quite public, right? Just take it offline. Just because the medium seems to suggest that you have to respond instantaneously to things, you don't have to respond instantaneously. What you want to do is really use that. For example, if it's a customer engagement, use that as a moment to engage with your customer, right? You know, call them up, take it offline, find a way to talk to them. What frequently happens is that if you resolve the problem offline, they go back online and they basically talk about, you know, how good you were. Now, the reason why you don't want to have it online is because for people like Jeremy and journalists in general and others are watching, right?
We're always watching.
You're always watching, yeah. And it can become news. So something that was minor can become news. If you delete it, you know, delete a comment, oftentimes startup founders are very defensive, right, about their technology, about what they're doing. And they might they might really get affected by it and want to respond. Again, you know, hold your fire, try to find a better way of engaging, but don't do it in a place where it's a kind of leaves a permanent record or is public facing. The second point is don't be a tool. Now that's a very technical, but don't be a tool. Look, truth is very important, and we didn't write this book for people to be, you know, create bad startups that were going to do bad things. But truth in this context is you will oftentimes, I will give an example. For example, if you had a battery recall on a product that you are producing, right? Now, you've just learned about it, and 5 minutes later, maybe you're having an interview with someone, a journalist, or you know, whatever. It might seem like it's the end of the world, and you might think it's the truthful thing to say, hey, this is terrible, this is like, you know, this is absolutely horrendous. But really, it's important to take a step back from that which you know, and because if you just give the whole truth at that moment, you're basically going to let down your customers, you're going to help your competitors, and you're going to give a journalist a fantastic headline, you know, something like, what a promise, everything went down in ruin, but, you know, because it's battery charged. The thing is, and I've seen it many times, the next day or the next 6 hours, you look at that same set of facts, right? And you go, it's not that bad. This is a moment that we can improve the product, or we can re-engage with customers. It's just not that bad. So it's better to hold your fire and be careful about what you say. The last point is say sorry twice. I can't overestimate how important that is. Frequently, you know, essentially, you know, problems are always going to arise. It's just the way it is. You're doing something new. You're doing something different. Something probably untried before. You're going to have problems. You want to bring everybody along for that. So part of that is just making sure that you're always ready to apologize and always ready to connect whatever problems you're having with the technology or what have you, with or whatever's going on in your startup, with the fact that you're doing something new. It really helps. And you'd be surprised at how your customers or your users will come along with you if you're ready to say, hey, look, we made this mistake, or the tech isn't working right now, it will be working, and you listen. And journalists also, it builds goodwill with journalists, and it'll build goodwill with your users. So that's it.
So I'm going to talk about another example of a company that I covered that I think might have benefited a little bit from thinking about sort of their core story and their vision. This company is based in California. It was just 2 people and some part-time people, and they made a ad blocking app for iOS. And things were going well. 10,000 people had downloaded the app in like 3 months, and they were very pleased with it. And then suddenly, Apple booted them from the App Store. It changed some rules around development and didn't like what this particular application was doing. So this was kind of a shock to the company, and then suddenly they got a whole lot of press coverage from major outlets, and they were completely unaware and unprepared for it. They just thought they were very small and nobody would pay attention. So immediately this small company faces this sort of public relations crisis like out of the blue. So the lesson to take away from that is that you never know, even if you're small, the world is so connected these days, of how something could become a very big story and potentially a very negative story. So you can prepare for this. You can talk about, well, what's going to happen if we have a crisis? What's going to happen if we have a data breach? Just about every company these days is taking in user data. The hackers are trying to go into whatever databases they can. So it's a good thing to sit down and talk about, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to contact our customers? What if the press starts calling us? What's going to be our story so we can try to, control this narrative? In the case of this company, the company that made the app that was booted from the App Store, I did an interview with the founder, and this kind of points to having a clear story. It took me like an hour to figure out exactly what his business was, and it was nothing to do with ad blocking. You have to remember that a lot of people who are even not familiar with technology, if I have trouble and I have to deal with some pretty technical material, then you're not telling a clear story. So you want to be sure on your website that you have it, very clear, practice it with people. It can't be practiced enough because it might be critical for when you do need to respond quickly to have it all out there. And also, never underestimate people's ability to misunderstand your product. Things are very complicated. And again, just emphasize, make sure it's clear or talk about it. Make sure everybody in your company can explain what you do in 2 sentences, and you'll benefit if things, suddenly go bad and you have to react.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's all about the story and the clarity around it, and I think, yeah. Good. So that's actually all from us. We'd love to have any questions. If you guys have any questions, we're happy to talk about specifics if you want to, and we'd answer if you have any, definitely questions about your own particular startups. We're happy to answer them and see if we can help. So.
Any questions from anybody? Oh, yeah.
G'day. You guys were saying that you have to be like, I think it was Mick Jagger, performing for the first time when you talk about your company. You're also talking about having a really well-practiced response that defines what your company's doing. How do you suggest people keep it fresh if they're saying the same thing over and over again?
Yeah. I think the key is that you always want to tie what you're doing to larger trends and sort of dimensions in the marketplace, right? You can always find something. What are you in? Do you have a startup?
Wearables, yeah.
Wearables. Okay. So, could you elaborate maybe on what you're doing exactly in wearables?
Sure. I'm making a device that alerts you to missed calls and messages if you keep your phone in your bag. But this device is designed to be hidden, unlike others.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there are going to be a whole lot of different news angles potentially you can tie, and trends that you can tie into, right? The way people work today, right, is going to be different. Eventually, you're going to be collecting potentially a lot of data, if you're successful, from your users, right? You can potentially use some of that data for insights, that you can also bring to the media that have relevance, right? The way people are using your device, and anonymize it, because obviously there's all sorts of privacy issues around use of data, but you can actually discover trends that have larger significance to, not only say a business sector, but actually maybe the way all of us live, right? It could be something that the City Morning Herald would be interested in, or a larger news service. So that's actually what you do, and it always comes back to your core story, right? You're interested, whatever drove you to be interested in wearables, that's always going to be inform your story, right? And those little news pegs that you create, those channels to people's sort of, interest, is going to be based off of that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool.
Any more questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a statement. Just wanted to, my lovely wife is holding a bowl, and to collecting business cards. Part of this core story idea is central to our half-day session that we run, that Jeremy and I run, to sort of help people nut out what their core story is. Oftentimes you need a little bit of distance from what you're doing every day to get a sense of what your story is, how it would connect to the media and other events. So if you put your business card in there, you might win a half day with us, which could be a blessing or a curse.